how many people actually have already started doing a registry and how many are yet to start. So maybe we can get that discussion going. So I'll hand over to Lee just to introduce himself as well.
Thank you. I'm Lee Reevy. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the NCBRS Worldwide Foundation. It all started for me in 2010 after my son was diagnosed clinically with NCBRS. As Nuala said, we did start off as a small support group network, and this grew and grew over the 10 years. And in 2020, we formed the NCBRS Worldwide Foundation. Our mission is to support our families, raise awareness, advocate for the latest scientific research, hold annual events for our families to meet. Although that has been virtually at the moment, we're in the process of starting to plan an in-person event for next year, and setting up our patient registry. So that's where we're at the moment.
Thank you. Maybe I can have hands up from the group, and well, we can't see all the faces though, so it might be, or even maybe a thumbs up for anyone who actually has started doing a registry or has some kind of a registry in place already. That you could just do a thumbs up if you have. No. Okay. All right. So that's good. Then we can talk about what we've done, and hopefully that may be of help to some people. So let me just share my screen now.
Nuala, just to let you know, you had one thumbs up there right at the end.
Okay, great. Sorry, when I switched to sharing screen, I probably missed that. So if maybe because I'm sharing screen, if you see any questions come up, let me know, because I might miss them since I can't see everybody's.
Great, we'll do that.
Green. Thank you. Okay. So just in terms of today's review, we want to talk a little bit about why we actually set up a patient registry for the NCBRS Worldwide Foundation, how we went about that, what initial steps we took and how that evolved over time. Once we kind of set it up, how we implemented it and I suppose publicized it and got people interested to complete, and some of the challenges that we kind of faced along the way. So I think that the first reason that we wanted to set up the NCBRS registry was to get a much better idea of the incidence and the severity. So in a lot of the publications that are out there, the numbers of confirmed cases are quite low, less than 100, where in actual fact, as we know now, there's like 270 people worldwide by kind of setting up that registry. Also, the publications that we've seen and kind of the initial discussions that a lot of us as parents would have had with clinicians has been very much a kind of a worst case scenario, because a lot of that might have been what was in the literature, some of the more severe cases, and that didn't that's not necessarily the case, because there's a wide range of kind of I suppose severity in terms of different aspects of the syndrome. The other thing was to drive connection. So just to understand where all those families were across all of the countries, the regions, so that we could drive connections globally as a group now, but also maybe within each country, so that people could have their own kind of internal discussions within countries if they wanted to. And then the third point is driving research and awareness. So really having this data will kind of help us to kind of have those discussions with researchers and academics and clinicians to give them a better understanding of the syndrome, to help encourage that registry, to help people kind of think if that data is available, which is including kind of genetic and clinical data, that they would be more likely to do more research into the syndrome, because that kind of data helped facilitate that. So just in terms of how it was set up initially, it was started off very simply. So initially it was as new were joining into the support, There was an Excel tracker just started up by one of our kind of family volunteers. That was around 2015. When I go back and look at the records of our old lists, and it was just keeping a very kind of simple amount of information. So the name of the child or the parent, the location, so that'd be the country, city or country, the age. So initially it was the age that was recorded, but later on that was kind of changed to the year of birth, you know, to make sure that we could always calculate the current age of, like, it's a simple thing, but just so you're not having to update and know, you know, the ages, the gender, so we could see if there was any trend for, you know, male or female. And then, you know, as I say, as people joined the groups, that was kind of collated for the people that were in there. And then as new people joined the Facebook groups, that was the way people came in. That detail would be collected and put in the tracker. And this tracker was then it was updated on an ongoing basis, but then it was kind of published, you know, maybe every 6 months. And as people were entering, they were kind of agreeing to kind of store that information, and it would be shared on a six monthly basis in the files on the Facebook page. So it meant that people could go in and connect. So, I mean, my child was diagnosed in 2019, so I was able to go in and see, okay, is there any more children in Ireland, and who are they, and maybe connect with parents, you know, locally, and meet up with people, as well as being able to connect people across the world through the Facebook group. But the process has been formalized now through a more formal kind of group registration form to collect the data. We also are collecting more contact information so that we're not totally reliant on the Facebook page, and people are opting into, I suppose, opting in on the website in terms of what way they want to be contacted or updated. You know, they want to be updated on research, they want to be updated on support, you know, what type of updates they want to have. So just as a result of having this, you can see that back in 2015 there was 63 patients globally noted, and you can see over the course of time how that's grown. And the latest list was, formal list was done in May of this year, and we 257, but we know we've over 270 now. And then it also kind of gives us an idea of the split between male and female. So we actually have slightly more males than females in terms of the cases, 61% males and 39% females. We can see as well from the data, you know, how many are kind of children in terms of less than 18 and how many are adults. And of course, with any syndrome, you know, it's important to know how the syndrome progresses over time. You know, is there any kind of, I suppose, shortening of life, or is there any more severity as people grow? So we have currently 49 adults. The age range that we have is 1 to 49. We've recorded 3 deaths, unfortunately, of patients with NCBRS, and they were kind of in the range of, I think, like 17, 82 kind of age. Seems to be, you know, to do with epilepsy from the indications that we've seen, uncontrolled epilepsy, and epilepsy is quite a common feature of NCBRS. So that's kind of some of the summary information that we can see. We can also see then, you know, what the kind of incidence rate is across the globe, how the spread of those patients are across the globe. You can see that we've at the moment kind of, you know, a larger number of patients in our kind of Excel registry, at least in Europe and North America. The number in South America seems picking up, and I think this is in line with maybe the way the genetic testing is now being done in that region. We only have 1 noted in Africa and 11 in Asia. Now, we have just recently brought onto our board another a number of new members, but one of them is in Africa, and we hope that that will help raise awareness of the syndrome in Africa. Obviously, you know, the development of the genetic screening there may not be as much, but we're trying to also look at other ways to kind of get diagnosis. So we have a number of technology projects like Face Match, because the facial recognition aspect, for example, of diagnosis, because there are a lot of similarities there. So we would hope that that would be improving, I suppose, the diagnosis earlier. So it is ultra rare, because, you know, looking at our numbers, we're kind of less than 1 in a million. Like in Ireland, for example, we have 4, the population of just over 5 million. So that kind of varies on a region by region basis, but I'm sure there are other cases of NCBRS out there that may not have been diagnosed yet, and that's why it's so important to be able to raise that awareness about the syndrome. So in terms of kind of then setting up a more detailed registry, so that was our initial kind of attempt in terms of just looking at the incidence and prevalence and kind of how it was spread across the globe. But then we wanted to kind of look at more information about the clinical aspects, the genetic kind of deletions or mutations that were causing it. So all of the kind of changes are on the SMARCA2 gene, but we've realized that there's a number of different mutations or deletions on that SMARCA2 gene. It's not just one uniform kind of change. So having that genetic information linked with the clinical information can kind of give us an idea of which is the mutation or change that's most prevalent, which is causing the most severe kind of presentation of the syndrome, and so on. And also having that information is really vital to us if we want to do any kind of research, because if you want to do any models of the disease or anything like that, it's really important to know what the most common deletion or mutation is. So what challenges did we kind of think about when setting up that initial, deciding what to do about that more kind of detailed registry? So obviously we're a small group in terms of the resource, in terms of the central board. You know, we're just a recently set up charity, so you know, money isn't flowing, and we didn't want to kind of reinvent the wheel either. We want to be able to learn from experience from what was out there already, and see how that worked for us. And then, you know, of course, you know, you can kind of develop further from there. But one thing that we obviously want to make sure is that if we were asking people to put data in the registry, we wanted to make sure that the data was going to be secure, that there was going to be proper governance on there to make sure that access to the data was controlled, that there was mechanisms to kind of get approval or whatever to access that data. And we also wanted to be able to centrally access that data as a foundation, and to have people kind of approve that, so that we could also kind of be aware of what was happening. So now it was Lee and Helen who, Helen was the previous chair prior to me, who kind of looked at this solution, which is the CORD Sanford Registry, which I have some slides from CORDS which I'll present. One of the things here is that they're providing this as a free of charge service to charities like the NCBRS Worldwide Foundation and all these rare syndromes. So that is obviously a big benefit, but not on its own. Like, we also want to make sure that we have that proper governance in place, as we said, that the patients own their own data and that they're controlling the use of the data, that we were able to kind of design what information we wanted to track and how it was tracked and how often it needs to be updated. So the infrastructure was in place to allow that. We were able to track both the genetic information and the clinical features, so that could be kind of compared if need be at a later point. So the decision was made to update yearly, because there's a lot of the patients that are coming into the registry now that are kind of younger, as the kind of genetic screening is improving and it's kind of happening earlier. But obviously they may not kind of show all of the symptoms at that point. So we don't want the data to be kind of skewed, I suppose, by the fact that maybe they won't have symptoms earlier. You know, for example, epilepsy normally kind of occurs, if it's going to occur, at of age 1.5 to 2, 1 to 2, that kind of age range. Whereas some other symptoms may not come on till, like, you know, we look at delayed eruption of teeth or things like that. You're not obviously not going to see that until, you know, in terms of the adult teeth in particular, till much later. So we want to be able to track that. And also the severity, as we said, was important to know as well. Now, one disadvantage we have with the CORDS registry, and this is kind of an ongoing discussion, is that the questionnaire is in English, and obviously we have a global community. So we have other ways to get around that to help us, which I'll talk about later. But it's something that we would be looking at as well, in terms of how we can get this translated to help make it easier for other patients.
Can I just jump in and say,
Yes.
CORDS are working on that as well. So I know it's an issue, I think, for the whole registry or the platform. So I know CORDS are looking into having this all translated as well, not just for us, but for any registry. Yeah. But
I suppose because every kind of questionnaire is specific to the individual, I'd imagine they can accommodate the infrastructure, but I suppose there would be some cost on our side in terms of the actual translation, you know, because I'm sure they could do that for every charity, for every language. But so in terms of the questionnaire development, I don't know, Lee, if you want to jump in and just say, because you were obviously involved in that at the beginning, if you want to say anything there.
Yeah,
in terms of the way
we developed it. So basically it was everything. You can build the questionnaire to how you want it. I believe ours is a pretty long questionnaire. We have around 52 questions on our questionnaire. So our patient registry has 52 questions. And we are allowed to actually go in as well, yearly, and remove questions. But we started off with basically everything to do with the syndrome, because there hasn't been much on this condition. There's only been 4 or 5 papers in total on NCBRS. So it was important for us to try and capture everything we could. So there's questions in there from feeding to stress to epilepsy, symptoms at birth. It's just every sort of question that we could think of. Obviously, we spoke with clinicians. We spoke with the geneticist who was part of the research who found the gene. So they had input on this as well, with what questions to ask. And that's pretty much how we built our questionnaire. And then obviously it gets sent off to CORDS, and then it is FDA approved as well. So it has to go through a committee in the US. So it is FDA approved.
Yeah, and I would say there, you know, that's a balance that you have to decide yourself if you're setting it up, you know, whether you want to kind of limit it. And, you know, obviously the length of the questions may affect the amount of people filling it in, you know, so, you know, obviously it might be off-putting if it's longer. You may think, okay, we want to track the most important things. I think kind of what we were feeling is that because, as Lee said, the literature didn't include certain things which we as a group knew to be important, because lots of people were talking about it as happening with their children. We wanted that documented, and we want to have an idea of the numbers, because that again helps clinicians guide how the treatment would be, because, you know, actually we have an adult study just starting, and what they were saying is that if they're seeing certain things in adulthood, that means that that screening program can happen much earlier in children. So we're kind of seeing a lot of issues with the eyes, and some of the patients have actually gone blind because of early cataracts and different situations that if that's something that they're aware of early, you can avoid those things, or at least be looking out for them. So that was really important to us, I guess. So I think then the next stage was the awareness campaign, and right, once the registry set up, encouraging people to actually go in and fill it in and understand why we were doing it, how the data was going to be managed, have them confident that the data was safe. And Lee is our kind of guru there in terms of the social media. So again, Lee, I don't know whether you want to jump in there in terms of how you promoted it.
So after we got our questionnaire finalised by CORDS and the FDA approved it, it was literally about pushing it out there to our families, asking them to enrol onto the registry. So we did a Zoom call. It was just me and Helen, and we done a presentation all about our registry, how to enrol and sign up to CORDS. And then it basically just went from there. We had a very good response at first, then it sort of dipped for a couple of months. Last May, we done a CORDS drive. So it was plastered over social media, email campaigns to all of our families, just encouraging them to join and enroll onto the registry. As it says there on the slides, we have a whole web page on our website about the patient registry, all the links to join, why they should join, you know, if their data's safe, it explains it all. Yeah, and that's pretty much it, to be honest.
Yeah, and I mean, I think what we have been thinking of doing as well, and this is kind of to do with the language issue as well as much as anything, is to kind of set up regional mentors and buddies. So as people come in to the group in the different regions or countries, that they have support of a regional mentor that would help them in terms of kind of promoting the registry, but also helping them physically to kind of complete it. Just to note as well that our registry is kind of patient-led, so you can have registries set up through CORDS that are either patient-led or clinician-led. In our case, we felt that the parents were, well, when I say patients, I'm really meaning carers and parents. But they're kind of more of an expert in terms of, the condition than, because any one clinician, it may be spread across, because the syndrome covers so many different body systems. There's lots of different kind of people involved, and not each one would know the overall picture.
Noella, do you mind if I interrupt you a second? Because there's so many great questions in the chat.
Okay, sorry, yeah, we'll stop there.
That it may be a pity to leave them all to the end, and I know a lot of these issues will be treated when you talk about the CORDS tool. But Helen, I wonder if you want to ask just your latest question yourself, because I don't know if I'll do it justice, and you just hinted on it, on whether this is a patient-initiated registry. Helen, do you want to speak to that?
Hi, Halwani. Hi, Nwala and Lee. It's Helen from Rare Diseases South Africa. Yeah, you actually half answered my question now by saying it's a patient-led registry. I just wanted to ask is, once they've completed the questionnaire and been enrolled essentially into the registry, is any of that clinical data that's submitted by them, is it verified by a doctor or clinician or healthcare professional at any stage? Please, thanks.
So that's something that's kind of come up as well. It's not at the moment, and I know that the only thing that I suppose that's generally verified is that they can submit reports on there. So for example, the genetic report, or what's coming, there may be other reports that kind of show a particular kind of diagnosis, like their epilepsy or the type of epilepsy that come from the neuro, like they could upload those type of documents on there, but at the moment it's not verified. Now I would say that is something that came up, let's say, on our research study that we're looking at in the adults. So actually there wasn't enough adults on the registry, because a lot of the new ones coming in are kind of younger. But the research study, they did pull that information. But a part of the survey that they're doing as part of that study would be physician verified in a way, because the questionnaire would be filled in by the parent or carer and verified with their doctor. And even when we were talking about that study, we had that issue, like who's going to fill it in? Because sometimes the GP may have all that information, but sometimes they don't. If I'm talking about my own son, I wouldn't say that any one person has that overall view. So for example, in that study, the researcher who's doing the study, who's a physician, can act as the physician, but like that, other reports would be submitted along with it to kind of supplement some of the information that's happening on there. Lee, I don't know whether you want to add anything else. No. Does that answer your question, Helen?
Yes, it does, thanks. And I'm going to be really cheeky and just ask you if it's got ethics approval, or if it's, to see if it's got that robust academic support. Thanks.
Yeah.
So it is. So in the USA, they call it FDA, so it's FDA approved because Accords is based in the USA, so it has to be approved by their legal body.
Yeah, they are approved in the Cord Sanford kind of ethics committee as well. So in terms of what's collected. So yeah. Was there other questions that we wanted to raise from the chat?
Yeah, there was a really interesting question, and I think we've just kind of touched on it from Danielle and Helen, and it was all about ethics committees and the ethics approval process. And there were just a few questions around just the ethics of collecting data. So maybe Danielle from Australia, you'd like to speak to that? If she's still on the call, I'm not sure. I think she may have dropped off. But really her question was whether or not there is an ethics committee and the ethics approval process.
Yeah, and that goes through Cords themselves, so it's not approval in every country. So obviously when there's a study as well, in terms of the use of the data, like the one that's happening in Germany now, any study to look at the data also has to have ethics approval. So there's ethics approval in terms of that questionnaire, ethics and regulatory approval in terms of the questionnaire that goes into it. But then there's also ethics approval in terms of any research that would be done that would use the data. So it's kind of two levels there in terms of the ethics approval. So I hope that answers the question. Yeah. Anything else we want to?
Yeah, I think that was good. There was a question about the tool, but I'm wondering whether when you discuss Cords, that won't be touched on as well. If it's not, Caroline, maybe you can re-ask that question. Okay,
that's fine. Okay, so as I said, the registry at the moment questionnaire is only available in English. Obviously, we had discussions with Cords to make sure that safety and the privacy of the data and the governance was in place. And obviously that's something that Cords have, we have on the website and link on our website in terms of updates on that. Something we need to do as well is to make sure that the data is updated. It's only as good as how kind of up to date the data is. So as we said, as different symptoms may come at different stages of the syndrome, we do encourage people to kind of go in and update the data on a yearly basis. So they would get a reminder to say, once they put in the data initially in terms of going back. Of course, if anyone wants to withdraw their data at any time, if they have any concerns, that's something that they can do. The data is their data, they own it, and they can decide. So that can be withdrawn. So that kind of obviously reassures people too. So update currently is we have 81 patients in the registry. Now that was as of couple of weeks. I actually haven't looked at it in the last week or two. So that's currently, as of our last official kind of registry number, was 32%. So it is something that we need to kind of continue working on to kind of increase the numbers. So these slides are actually from the Cords registry at Sanford Research. So this is just some slides that they prepared just to kind of give you a little bit more background. So obviously their mission is to be able to bring together the patient groups and the researchers to be able to do that research to accelerate rare disease kind of not just treatments, but also just understanding about the syndromes, the causes, the pathways, and so on. They are a kind of a hospital and research organization all around the US, and they provide this kind of cost-free service for rare disease registries across the world. So then they have the platform where on their platform, they're able to liaise with all those researchers, patients, advocacy groups, and industry partners kind of globally to kind of do that research. So, you know, as we said, the questionnaire is completely customizable. You know, when you're setting that up at the beginning, it can contain all the information you want. So contact information, demographic information, kind of clinical symptoms and health information, quality of life, obviously the genetic information we also have tracked. And obviously that's something that, you know, we're hoping over time as well, you can kind of see that natural history as the syndrome, kind of what symptoms are kind of likely to come in when across the development of the child or the patient. So they are, you know, as we said already, there's no cost. It's made available at no cost to patients and advocacy groups, and they don't intend ever to kind of change that, you know, in terms of charging anyone. So in terms of the kind of input from, you know, the obligation or the kind of responsibility from the parents and the families is to complete that questionnaire, and then hopefully to do on a yearly basis update, and then as I say, if there's going to be research done, they have to apply for access, and they, you know, they need to have approval for any research that they're doing as well. So the reason that they kind of set up this system or service is because they found that the majority of rare diseases didn't have a registry, and therefore that made it quite difficult for people to connect and find their own community, but also being able to link those families in with all of their data with research and clinicians as well, to kind of promote that research. The participants are the owners of the data, and they're kind of storing and managing the data and applying governance. They never sell data, rent or lease any of that. They never give out any of that information, apart from, as I say, the standard governance procedure for research that is approved. And yeah, so that would any kind of requests would go to the Stanford's Research Review Committee in terms of any requests to review the data. They don't get any kind of personal de-identified data. It's all anonymous. We can use kind of anonymized data as well. Really just more for one instance. In terms of education, grant applications and numbers and things like that. But obviously participants, as their information, are giving that opt-in to allow us to see that data. And pharma can notify us. So if there is any research from pharma side or trials, they can notify CORDS, who will then kind of let participants know if they've opted in, obviously, to doing that kind of research. So yeah, we said that. This is just some information on CORDS in terms of yeah, what they have at the moment in terms of participants, partners for their registries, and participants in the registries across 93 countries and 50 states. So this is just to kind of give you an idea of, as we said, we've 81 participants in there. So it gives us an idea of whether the diagnosis was determined by genetic testing. And actually, as we have families coming into the group, that's something that we always check, that it is something that's kind of confirmed genetically as well as clinically, you know, because there are a number of syndromes that are related to the SMARCA2 gene. So it's kind of, I suppose, that initial thing to kind of help with their registry to know that they are, in fact, NCBRS. This is information that helps us determine what way the genetic testing was done. And this is useful for researchers because in some countries, they may have done a specific kind of syndrome test or a test on a particular gene. And other ones, it may have been, for Charlie, for example, it was determined based on whole exome sequencing. So that might be interesting in terms of the data that might be available to researchers as well. Does the participant now? Well, my controls are covering my slides here. So one of the, I'd say about 60%, well, we've kind of found from talking to people, about 60% of the people with NCBRS experience seizures. And I'm going to have to try and move these things out of the way so I can see. So of the people that answered this, you can see that, well, there was only 40 had answered this question, but that, you know, 36 of those had experienced seizures. And then we have, sorry, not arrowing on. And then we have a bit more kind of detailed questioning in terms of the types of seizures that, main type of seizures that the patients are experiencing. See if there's any trends there. See that there's quite a lot there in terms of the absent staring spells, petit mal seizures. And then it's kind of, you know, and this will depend on the age as well, and looking at the control, how often the seizures are, have they had them in more than 1 year. We found that a lot of the seizure activity starts quite young in the patients that get it, and then obviously they'll go on medication and hopefully be controlled, but there are some that, you know, some that aren't controlled. You can see there that in some of those cases, you know, where you have a very high incidence of seizures. Then another question is around feeding. That's another common thing in terms of problems with digestion and feeding. And you can see in the people that answered, there's a very high proportion that show that feature. And again, you can go on and look at other types of issues. So the feeding challenges and the failure to thrive are kind of very high up in there, but also things like difficulty swallowing or choking, constipation is kind of high in terms of instance. And then this is questions in terms of whether they needed to be tube fed or not, or whether they were oral. In the majority of cases here, it was oral, but there are obviously cases where 7% where tube feeding was required. I think that's tube feeding, yeah, again. Then there was questions about sleeping, whether there was issues there, and you can see frequent nighttime waking is a common thing there, and delayed sleep onset. And communication is an issue with NCBRS, so there's quite a few of the kids that are non-verbal, so there was questions on that in terms of what was the best method for communicating. So you can see, you know, some of them were sign language or gestures or using PEX cards or systems. So yeah, so that kind of gives an idea as well for parents that are kind of newly diagnosed in terms of some of the issues, but also some of the ways to address the communication with their children. This is talking about when the first word was, in terms of, you know, I think, you know, this does vary quite a lot. I think from what we've kind of heard talking to people, it probably seems even worse than this information that's on the registry, but the information showing here that 1 to 3 years for the first word, you know, is quite a high but there are quite a lot of people who haven't filled in this question. So again, it may be because they're filling it in early and they haven't got that first word yet. So that's something that they need to go back and fill in.
Noella, I think
Yes.
Liliana has a question specifically about the questionnaire
Sure,
and the
go ahead.
questions that you were able to add. Juliana, do you want to ask the question yourself, or would you like me to do it?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can, yes. Hi, Julian.
I'm actually, so I am from a different organization, and I'm following you on Facebook and admire everything that you are doing. So we have a similar syndrome in terms of being rare, and I was interested to follow your model. So I remember that when I was researching, I did find the courts registry, and I did enter once upon a time some data in there just to, verify how is it working. And when I did that, there were some questions that were not applicable to all the syndromes, because they were asking a specific set of questions nominizing one syndrome. I don't remember the name, but it felt to me like the registry was for that syndrome and not for all of them. So I'm wondering how is actually working the registry. Do you need to make a collaboration with them so they include a set of questions for you, or you need to ignore what is dedicated to other syndromes? Or
yeah, you just start with whatever you can start with a clean slate and decide, obviously you can use what they have in there as a guide. But Lee, I'll leave you to answer that because it was you and Helen that did up the list of questions, but you were able to start from scratch, weren't you, in terms of filling it in?
Yeah, so they just showed us a few examples of how questionnaires were built, and we built our own questionnaire. So all of the questions and the bits that you see here on the slide are all from our own questions. So each questionnaire is specific to each condition. So you'd go onto CORDS, you would sign up originally on CORDS, and then you would select the rare disease that you are wanting to participate in. So you'd sign up on there, you would select NCBRS, and then our questionnaire would come up, and it would be all of our questions specific to our condition. That's how it works. And to get that going, you would have a consultation with CORD, you would create a questionnaire with all of your own questions, and then obviously it would go to their ethics committee, then it would have to be FDA approved as well before it goes live.
I
hope that helps.
So it is.
Yeah, yes, it does help a lot. It does have, I was the first one to register with my syndrome, and it seemed like it was possible to register in there without, doing some other pre-consultation, but
so yes, so initially you would go in, like I said, and you would answer a few questions based on what CORDS need to know, and then you would select your rare disease, and then it will show you the questionnaire for that rare disease. So I think they just take a few standard details to find out what questionnaire you need to answer, basically.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I have an email from you so I can contact you later to ask for more support on this, contact from CORD or something like that, so that we can get the ball rolling for us as well?
Yeah, and
absolutely, of course.
Yeah, Alyssa from CORDS is very helpful, and I'm sure she'll also kind of help you kind of set up. If the syndrome was already in there as a drop down, I don't know whether someone would have put something in, but she'll know, if you contact Alyssa, she'll know, but really you really need to be setting up your own one to make sure. Now that's not to say that everything is going to be applicable for every person, because for example, Lee's child doesn't have epilepsy, which is quite common, and my child doesn't have scoliosis, which is quite common, which Lee's child might have. So it does vary, and not everything will be applicable to every child, but still it's good to kind of say, well, no, they haven't got it, because it gives us still an idea of instance. So
yes, of course, then you can have a graphic saying this percentage has and this percentage doesn't have. But in the questionnaire I filled in, it was something related to comorbidities that were not at all associated ever with Coffin-Lorry syndrome. So either there was a mistake in the questionnaire, or this made me think that maybe it's not open for everybody. So I kind of put it aside for
Yeah.
for a while.
Yeah. Okay. We'll send you on the details, or we can send it through RDI, you know, if we don't have your information. Okay.
Thank you very much.
I
Okay.
will just pop our email address in the chat box if anyone wants to drop us an email after this.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, if you go onto the court's website, the contact information is on there as well, and they have someone. But I'm sure we could. I'm sure Alyssa probably wouldn't mind if we shared her information either, you know, because she's shared it on similar kind of presentations before. So and this is just behavioral things that we want to kind of get an instance of. Now, in terms of information, you know, this is just kind of initial kind of screen when you fill in. As you say, you can go in and fill in the initial details as enrollment into the registry that Lee mentioned, and then you'll go in and you'll pick from a drop-down list, or you can type in your syndrome and it'll probably find it, or use the drop-down. And make sure that you're filling in the right one, obviously picking the right one to get the specific questionnaire that's for that syndrome. So then once it's in, you can click save, and you'll be contacted once a year from the time you fill in the registry to kind of do an update. So you can see on the website that there is a participant portal that you can go in and look at, and we can, like, we were able to go in the participant portal and see how many people are in our registry and that type of thing. So as we said, it is free. It is enabling that research to happen. But really all that's involved is your kind of time as an organization in setting that up, you know, investing that time up front to get it right, kind of keeping an eye and seeing if changes need to be made as new information becomes available. And from a patient point of view, the time, it's just, it's the investment of time in terms of whatever time it fills to fill in the questionnaire. So that's, I'm going to end the share there, and we'll see if there's any more questions.
Noella, there's been plenty of questions. I feel like they've just been buzzing all over the place.
Okay, so hopefully, I mean, if we run out of time, if we can get just a copy of the chat, I'm happy to email, you know, any answers to any questions that we don't get to. Only have 8 minutes left.
Okay,
So.
great. I mean, it's a good sign. It means we're all here. Caroline asked a question about the FDA approval and how difficult and long the process is, and you had hinted on the investment of time that's involved. Could you elaborate on that a little?
Yeah, we didn't have to do anything. Like, Cords handled all of that process. So I don't know at the time. Can you remember, Lee, how long that took?
Yeah, so it was literally, so we obviously started planning in the March, and so we started in the March, so looking at about 5 months, 5 to 6 months from start till completion, FDA approved on our website and launched. So it is a long process because it has to go through all the review boards and then the FDA as well. But it's worth it, in my opinion. You know, that 5 month wait and all that hard work within them 5 months is paying off. We now have a global patient registry.
Yeah, and as I say, they do the applications. You don't have to do that. You don't have to.
Yeah, it's all done by them.
So it takes the burden off of you as a group, you know, in terms of the resource. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Marianne and Helen both asked a similar question, and it was all about who owns the data and who has access to it. So the question, Marianne, please feel free to step in if I'm not giving it justice, is does Cords just store the data, or do they use the data? And Helen asked a similar question also about access and use.
Yeah, so Cords, the patient or the parent, carer, guardian, owns the data. They can withdraw at any time. They can approve its use, what it's used for, and whether it's used for research, whether it's kind of for within the foundation. The courts don't use the data for their own use. So any application to use the data needs to be made to courts and needs to go through a review procedure in terms of, release of that data. So we within the foundation can see data that is de-identified as well in terms of kind of overall, but everything that's shared is also de-identified. So it is the patients that own the data, they control the use of the data, they can withdraw it at any time. So, and there is a governance procedure in place in terms of how it's used.
With regards to sharing that data with us, the data only gets shared with us if the participant selects that. So we can't just go in and look at anyone's data. It's only if they have said that the foundation can look at that data as well. So as I believe, as Nuala said, we've got 81 registered, and the last time I looked, we had about only 45 of them sharing the data with us. So again, it is all owned by the patient or the parent carer. And it's down to them who have access to that data, where it goes, if they want to participate in any future research. So it is very much patient owned.
Great, thank you. Have I adequately asked those questions? Okay, cool, I think so. There was a question which I think is interesting as to when a patient advocacy mailing list really turns into what you can call a registry. I thought this question was quite important because all of us are calling at different times in the journey with different resources available to us. Nuala, when you first started speaking, you mentioned Facebook and Excel and those kinds of tools.
Yeah.
When did it really become a registry?
Yeah, and I would say that our Excel, because our Excel, as we said, has 270 people on it, whereas our detailed registry only has 81, right? So in terms of that registry for contact, it's now that kind of detail when people are joining, they're signing up for information. So for example, the study that we were approached with from Germany, which is the adult study, even if people aren't in the registry and they have opted in to be contacted about research when they fill in their registration form, which we use to have the basic information on our Excel. But if they opt into email and opt into seeing about research, if we're approached about research, we send them that information, right? So, or they may opt into just newsletters, or they may opt into Zoom calls, or, to have support group calls, so there's different. So yes, we still maintain that Excel registry, even though we have the CORDS registry, because we kind of use them for different purposes, just because we may never get the full picture in terms of the instance from the one in CORDS, because not everyone will feel comfortable to go in and do that, or have the time to do it, or the inclination, or whatever. Whereas the more basic one, obviously it's much easier to be part of, and it still gives value.
Great.
With regards to the Excel registry as well, so the information we collect on it is only accessible via the Board of Trustees, and we just share a standard list on our private Facebook group that other families can see. So it will just be like location, age, and parent and guardian's name. The full Excel sheet is only accessible by us trustees as well. So that would be contact information, everything like that, addresses, date of birth. So that again is only accessible by the trustees, and it's just a standard list on Facebook so families can see where the prevalence is on that.
Yeah, by having the parent guardian name on the Facebook page, like, as everyone that's come in is obviously a member of the page, so they can be seen as being a member of the page. So we're not giving out any additional information, but it does mean that they have a name. So I was able to, let's say, contact the other parents in Ireland because I see that name and search them on Facebook and reach out and whatever. But that's up to them then what they want to share or not share with any parent,
Great. Leah and Noella, I will send all the questions that we received in the chat because there were so many. But since we have a minute left, I was wondering if anybody wants to voice their questions before we close the call, or has a burning question that they would just like to get in there before we close.
Hi, it's Helen. I hope I'm not talking too much.
Yes, please
Nope.
go ahead, Helen.
I just wanted to ask that final question I asked in the chat. So as you've been speaking, I've been I understand it a bit better now, but are you essentially saying that you're essentially part of a bigger rare disease registry and you can access the information relevant to your condition? So it's not a separate thing, it's all maintained by CORD. So it's essentially an international registry that you can kind of add on to but be a part of, but essentially everything's housed there and the data is inputted from all over the world.
Yeah, so it isn't like each registry is separate in that it's all on the same platform. So that's why we're not reinventing the wheel. It's on the same platform, the same infrastructure is applying for across all of those registries for all of those different rare diseases. But it's our own registry in that obviously people go in and select NCBRS and fill in a very kind of customized questionnaire for NCBRS. It's customized in that way, but the infrastructure and the governance and the ethics processes and the FDA process, all of that is kind of standardized. It is an established registry, as you say, global registry that can be used for different rare diseases, but it is customizable, completely customizable by each rare disease. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And is it just web-based or is there a downloadable app?
So it is web-based, but you can have the questionnaire sent out to you via post as well, and then you would send that back to CORDS, and then they would enter that information onto the system. So there's no app at the moment, it's just web-based and postal.
Okay, thanks. No, postal would never work in South Africa.
Great. Thank you so much. I have personally learned quite a lot over the last 60 minutes. But Leah and Noella, I'll let both of you close today's session.
Yeah, and thanks very much. I will. Thanks for all of your questions and your interest. We will answer any questions that were left unanswered. I'll just reach out to Alyssa and just make sure she's okay for me to share her email address, and then I will send that back through. I'll send that back through RDI to kind of share with everybody. And but in the meantime, there is a kind of a generic email address on the site. I'll probably go to Alyssa anyway, but there is a generic email on the CORDS Sanford site that you can reach out and say you're interested in doing a registry. So you can start the process straight away if that's what you wish. So thank you.
Yes, thank you everybody. And just so you know, our email address is in the chat, and so is a link to the CORDS website for more information there.
Great. Thanks everyone. Have a good evening. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.